Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley 2. The interesting, but a little bit of a letdown fight, in my opinion. Watching the fight, seeing the way that Jake Paul handled the situation with all the boos. At one point in the fight, it seemed like it was going to be like the first fight, but a little bit less action. It wasn't, at the beginning of the fight, it took both fighters a little bit of time to get acclimated with each other again. I don't know what it was. I think that each of them felt that they had so much pressure on themselves. Think about it. Tyron Woodley came into this fight, and we're just going to get right into it. Tyron Woodley got into this fight with so much pressure on the line. When he lost, I think a lot of stuff flashed before his eyes. The fact that he lost to Jake Paul twice. The fact that he doesn't get another chance after this with Jake Paul. And it might be his last chance to fight in boxing as well. Having two of these losses against Jake Paul is a very tough situation to be in. It's and for Jake Paul going into this fight, for sure, 100%, there was so much pressure on his shoulders to get this KO. The KO victory that Jake Paul got was sudden, quick. Seeing some of the replays without the commentary, you could hear the thud of Jake Paul's boxing glove hitting Tyron Woodley's head. Very unexpected. The way that the fight was going at the beginning, it was somewhat lackluster. It wasn't what all the hype was all about. Speaking of the hype, I felt like this one, even doing a pre-show podcast about this one, I feel like not many people were talking about it. A lot of people were excited for the Tommy Fury fight. And for Tyron Woodley to accept the fight on 2 weeks' notice, like the way he did. And the build-up was a little bit haphazard, if you will. There was a lot of things that they had to quickly do in order to build this fight up. Think about it. The first fight was being built from the Floyd Mayweather fight that his brother had, Jake Paul brother had, against Logan Paul. Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather had with each other. Then that fight was built out for, I believe, a couple months until it actually happened. And then the quick turn of and switch of opponents that Jake Paul had to deal with. I could commend him 100% for taking the fight. He didn't have to take the fight. I felt like it was a big test for him coming in. This is his first time going against an opponent that he's already faced. It could be a detriment. It could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. And it could be that Tyron Woodley may have figured him out. May have had all of these rounds with Jake Paul and now is confident enough to get out of neutral. But that wasn't the case. I felt like in some instances, Tyron Woodley was letting go with some of his combinations, which were super quick. But in other instances, I felt like he threw those slick combinations, and then all of a sudden, he was just back to holding and grabbing. And that was the theme of this fight, and I think a lot of people are going to forget about it because of the vicious KO that Jake Paul had. But the fact is that going into this fight, while this fight was playing out, There was a bunch of clinches, a bunch of holding and grabbing, and it was done by both fighters. And at one point, it caused the cut on top of Jake Paul's head with that elbow, that downwards elbow, that 12-6 elbow that Tyron Woodley got on Jake Paul. Of course, it was an accident, but it caused some major bleeding for Jake Paul, especially compared to what he's had in the past, which I don't believe he's had any cuts like this. Nothing this deep and nothing this wide. We haven't seen Jake Paul deal with something like this, and the way that he did was commendable, especially with a former UFC welterweight champion staring you down. But what Jake Paul did by pulling the rabbit out of his hat, as some people are saying, and doing what he did and getting that flush knockout, that clip is going to be replayed all over the place, and it's going to be talked about all over the place. This is something that Jake Paul had to do to salvage this fight. You could hear it in the crowd. You could hear people booing Jake Paul. You could hear people booing the fight in general. That the holding and all the clinch stuff that was going on, and even at one point the tussle that brought Jake Paul to the ground, where Tyron Woodley threw him almost, and got the takedown on him. I feel like I'm doing an MMA podcast right now, but in the boxing fight where Tyron Woodley took down Jake Paul, at that point, Jake Paul had to recoup, and I was talking about this before, but all that stuff, pushing and shoving, and we'll talk about it in the Deron Williams fight, but all of that, it plays into a fighter's mind. It seeps into their mind where they know that they got knocked down. They don't know if it was a slip or a fall. It's just in the moment that, you're on the ground. It's just an accumulation of stuff that you got to think about. And obviously it does play into, like maybe potentially, roughing the person up and really getting into their head, like I said. So with all that, with the fight being so slow, I felt like almost Tyron Woodley got lulled to sleep almost. He got really comfortable in there, from what I could tell. From what I could tell, Tyron Woodley was just following the rhythm that Jake Paul was setting. And maybe even the rhythm that he was setting for himself. It was just a jab, or, it was just a strike, loading up something, and it would end with a clinch. But the way that Jake Paul set up his last shot was really good. Faking to the body, catching him on the head. Had Tyron lowering his guard, and hit him with a clean shot that dropped him face first on the mat. And after that face first shot, after you fall face first on the mat, the referee is going to call it right off. There's not going to be any count, no nothing. And for sure, Tyron Woodley couldn't even think about getting up. Even when he did get up, he was dazed and confused, sitting there on the stool. And surprisingly, while Jake Paul is doing his thing on the mic, he's still standing around, dabbing him up with the most confused face that I've ever seen on a fighter. And, even Mama Woodley was right in the middle of all that, hugging Jake Paul and all this kind of stuff. And then poor Tyron Woodley is just standing there in the middle of that boxing ring, knowing what just happened. He just got defeated twice, and one of them being by knockout from Jake Paul, which is a very tough situation for Tyron Woodley. Leading up to this fight, we saw in many interviews and things like that Tyron Woodley was all over the place. He was literally filming some TV show while being interviewed from Ariel Helwani. So did he take this fight as seriously as he could? Maybe he just had other obligations where he couldn't turn that down. Who knows? But for Jake Paul, his next fight's going to be a big one. This clip is going to be played all over the place, like the Nate Diaz fight. The way that he set it up was great, and he even looked super surprised. When you see Tyron Woodley, who hasn't had a knockout like this since, you can't even remember the last time Tyron Woodley got one-shot KO'd like this. I think it was just early in his career that it happened to him. But nothing in the UFC where something like this would have happened. Gilbert Burns wasn't able to do it. Vicente Luque took him out, but it wasn't like this. Colby Covington took him out, but it wasn't like this. Jake Paul was the only one to get that flush knockout on Tyron Woodley. Obviously, it's boxing, and there's a bigger opportunity for that because there's no wrestling, there's no clinch, and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, this is a guy that hasn't been boxing for a very long time, and he was able to get that flush KO knockout against a former 5-time world champion in Tyron Woodley, who at one point was knocking out everybody in the UFC. Some of the most vicious knockouts in the UFC. So I think the next thing for Tyron Woodley, if he does really want to fight, I think it's got to be that Dan Hardy fight. But it can't be in boxing. I don't think he even wants to box. Obviously, this is an instant reaction, live streamed right after the fight. And we don't know what Tyron Woodley's thoughts are right now. But we know that even after the last fight, the first Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley fight, it seemed like Tyron Woodley was under the assumption that he won that fight, which was very strange for me because I couldn't see Tyron Woodley winning that fight at all. There was no way I thought that Tyron Woodley won the first fight. And now, obviously, this one was a KO, and it has that stamp on it. But would Tyron Woodley be thinking to himself that, hey, I was winning this fight until that KO? So could he say to himself, could he say something like that to himself? Could he hype him up himself again? And unfortunately, I think he could. I think he could say to himself that, yeah, I was doing a pretty good job before I got KO'd by Jake Paul. And at the end of the day, he can do whatever he needs to do. But I think his stock is taking a hit at this point. People are forgetting about the amazing stuff that he did in the UFC and in Strikeforce, and they're just forgetting who Tyron Woodley was. Tyron Woodley was, and he still is, one of the greatest welterweights ever. He's on that list. I think people are forgetting that he's still on that list, in my opinion. Kamaru Usman has passed him, but he's on that list, maybe top 5 of all time. Tyron Woodley for sure is on that list. And then for Jake Paul next, he's just got to, I think it's got to be Tommy Fury next. But after that, one of these UFC fighters is going to figure out a way to get out of their contract. And I know that Nate Diaz only has one more fight under his contract, but now since he has declined a fight, they're gonna re-up his contract. They're gonna put him back on a 3-fight contract, and Nate Diaz has to play that out until he can be a free agent and possibly fight Jake Paul, who is 100 and he's a cruiserweight. And Nate Diaz fights at 170. He's a big guy, but at the end of the day, Jake Paul is a bigger guy. So we'll see what's next for Jake Paul. But it's going to be Tommy Fury next, which I think is set in stone. Jake Paul's not going to admit it because he's still mad at him for backing out of the original fight. But I think that Tommy Fury's next. And then it's got to be either Masvidal or Nate Diaz. And unfortunately, Nate Diaz is getting older and he's smaller. And then on top of that, if he's going to fight Masvidal, he's getting older. And he used to fight at 155, but he's found his natural weight class to be at 170. But he still is a smaller individual. So I think Jake Paul, after his fight with Tommy Fury, he's got to find someone. And it might have to be Nate or Masvidal, who are in the building. He's got to find someone that's going to really not just test him, but make the public believe that he might actually get beat. And Tyron Woodley in the first fight was just that. People saw him who never saw him before, and seeing the way that he acts, seeing the way that he defended his belts in the UFC, and really believed that Jake Paul would get his first L, which he didn't, and in this fight, he got that emphatic KO. I think overall, the fight was getting really boring, but the KO, which hasn't happened to Tyron Woodley before, was spectacular. And it saved the fight, saved the whole card, and it saved this whole YouTube boxing thing for Jake Paul. But kudos to him. He was in a very tough position with that cut. And he was in a very... Tyron Woodley was beating him to the punch at some point. But for him to still have his wits with him in the later rounds and do what he did was great. It was special. The knockout will live forever. And we all hope the best for Tyron Woodley. Okay, the last fight that I want to talk about, which... Amanda Serrano was on this card as well. Amanda Serrano got the great win. Defense was looking a little bit, she looked open for a lot of counter shots, especially when she was in the corner there just teeing off on her opponent. I mean, the Katie Taylor fight is just lined up for her now. Hopefully that fight is next. Both fighters seem like they want it, and it could be the main event on a card. But I think Amanda Serrano looked great overall, and I think the defensive issues might just be to the fact that she's really looking for that knockout, which she didn't get. But hey, she was really going after it, and good for her. Really, really good for her. But I think a lot of people were looking out for this Deron Williams versus Frank Gore fight. Frank Gore being the former NFL Pro Bowler, I believe. And then Deron Williams, possibly a future NBA Hall of Famer. A great basketball player and co-owner in an MMA gym. Deron Williams was able to get the win. He was able to defeat Frank Gore. It was a fun fight. I mean, it was a very sloppy fight. There was a lot of openings that I could see, and Deron Williams called that out himself when speaking to Ariel Helwani after the fight. But I think it was a fun fight. I mean, these YouTuber, boxers, sports athletes, all this kind of stuff, when these guys just go after each other, no matter what it is, at the end of the day, it's a fight. Be it a sloppy one, be it a boring one, or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, this thing's a fight, and it was fun to watch. When Deron Williams pushed Frank almost, right through the ropes, and you could see he had enough with this tackle nonsense that Frank Gore was doing. It looked like he was legitimately trying to take down Deron Williams, which was kind of weird. But anyways, Deron Williams had enough of that and started pushing him and shoving him all over the place and getting him off and trying to create that space to operate. And he was able to do so. I think a lot more. I think one thing that we can learn from this fight, and one thing that boxers coming from other disciplines could really bring into their game, is just seeing every single opening, which I think Deron Williams is seeing, and keeping your hands up. I mean, Deron Williams, you could see his natural instinct was to keep his hands up, which was great, especially in the later rounds. I didn't see his hands drop too much. Frank Gore was using a little bit more of that Philly shell style, but you could see that he was a lot tired. Man, boxing, combat sports, whatever it is, they have a different type of cardio that is involved. Meaning that you could be an athlete, a super athlete in another sport, but then you come to this sport and you will get super tired. You saw Frank Gore just hanging onto the ropes at the end of that fight. He was super tired. And then kudos to Deron Williams. His cardio that he had was great. Even after the fight, he looked like he could have gone a couple more rounds. I think it was a great fight from him. It was a fun fight. You know what? I'm not going to say it was a great fight. I think it was a fun fight. Deron Williams put on a great show. Frank Gore put on a great show. And at some points you could believe that either or could have won. Either or could have got a knockout. Those big boys, heavyweights, I mean, we've seen it in professionals that anybody can get a knockout in the heavyweight division if they hit it right on the button. But you know what? I think that was a great fight. And I think it's great that Deron Williams acknowledged that it was going to be his last one. He just wanted to do it. And I think that's great. I think that more professional athletes, when they do these one-offs like this and they don't come back, I think we should give them more kudos for trying something new, because nobody wants to be that person that legitimately tries their best and all that kind of stuff and then gets knocked out and then they become a meme forever. Like, look at Nate Robinson. He took a chance and his whole NBA career almost gets flushed down the toilet because he gets knocked out by Jake Paul. How unfortunate for that. And it absolutely sucks because of all the hard work that you put in, all the time and effort that you've put in, and then just by this one knockout, like I said, everything gets flushed down the toilet. And both of these guys took a chance. They look like monsters in there just by looks, you know. The fight was sloppy, but it was fun, and it was a good one to watch. And I think that Frank Gore still wants to do this. Let's see what happens. I mean, I don't foresee him seeing. I don't foresee him fighting anybody professional or anything like that anytime soon. But if you can get another athlete in there, another NBA player, you can keep this thing going. And I think it was a great fight. Just from an entertainment standpoint, you gave the fans what they actually wanted, which was a rough and tumble battle. And I think we couldn't have expected anything more. What a, interesting night of fights. I usually say great night of fights. What an interesting night of fights. I think that this Jake Paul Express is gonna keep on going. It's left this stop, and Tyron Woodley is one chapter in his career now, and he's bringing along the rest of these guys with him. Two of the fighters that were on this card underneath Jake Paul had fought for MVP promotions before, and you can assume that he's going to be bringing these people with him along the ride. What a great night. It was fun. A couple boring parts, but I think by witnessing what we've witnessed, to be able to say that we watched it live, it was a good one, and I really love exploring it in this podcast. So if you can share, hit the bell notification, subscribe, all that good stuff on YouTube, I really appreciate it. And it honestly means a lot for you to be listening. If you caught it live, if you caught a bit of it live or anything like that, I really appreciate it. Like I said, leave a comment below, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really helps out. If you're listening to this on audio, then for sure watch out for these live streams. They come after big matchups, and you can catch them on YouTube. And then if you're watching this on YouTube, you can also listen to this in podcast form on all the different podcast networks if you would like. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time out of your day, night, whenever you're listening to this and listening to me talk. This was a fun one. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz.